Bob Cariglia here with Rizolve Partners. I've got the good fortune to be talking to my partner, Steve Cummings, who is both a partner and also the founding of Rizolve.ca. Steve, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Bob, once again.
Good. I asked that question, of course, because this is such an interesting time of year, isn't it? We're right in the middle of August. And as anybody in the business world knows, it's always a bit of an unusual time of the year because people are on vacation and we're getting prepared for September, but it's they call it the dog days of summer for a reason, and we're right in the middle of the dog days of summer. So Steve, from let's get right into it. From the perspective of the planning cycle and the business cycle, what should business owners be thinking about, during these down days in the middle of August?
Well, I mean, it is a time, once again, a time for reflection. It's funny. I was looking at one of the graphics that we had, Bob, that we share with our clients on the repeating cycle of success through the planning process. And it's interesting to understand that really, because typically the best quality companies do strategic planning if they're a December year end, which often they are, the public companies and so on. They typically do some kind of strategic planning in the summer, in the down periods, ahead of the January rush and the September rush to year end and so on. So you typically, take the management team offsite in the summer and do some kind of long range reflection on the future, typically 3 to 5 years. Mm-hmm. So that then is the segue into the annual business process. In other words, the forward look for 12 months. And typically, if you're a December year end, you would be trying to do that in the late October, November timeframe in order to get your plans, goals, and objectives, and maybe a written plan together by the end of the year.
Right.
Through that, you've shared that with the team, and everybody can get in lockstep with executing on the plan. So then the next two elements to the planning process, which shouldn't be forgotten, are, once you've got your annual plan, then you need to follow up on the annual plan by, well, are we achieving what we said we were going to do? Mm-hmm. So you want to be following the KPIs that you set, the key performance indicators. Are they telling you that you're hitting your goals and objectives, and monitoring that on an ongoing basis. And then the fourth element that best in-class companies do, the fourth element is some kind of pivoting based on reality during the year, and typically that would be allied with a reforecast of the plan. So you've got a strategic plan, 12-month annual plan, monitoring the implementation of the plan through KPI reporting and so on, and then a reforecast of the plan if you get enough plan to kind of make sure that expectations are set across the rest of the team in order to achieve your goals. And if you have those planning processes, and if you get more competent at doing that and more accurate and so on in your forecasting of what the business is going to do, you are driving value into the business, unquestionably.
Right. Yeah. No, that's interesting, and what a great way to take advantage of this down month by getting your head in gear, start thinking about, okay, let's put the schedule together, let's make sure that the team understands what the goal, what the time frames are, and then what the goals and objectives are, because certainly in my career, one of the things that I've seen is in small to medium-sized companies is you get to the end of the year and you realize, boy, we really haven't laid out the plan. Yet, as you say, world-class companies, when they kick off the new year and they know exactly what that annual plan's all about, and that annual plan is in sync, with the 3 to 5 year plan, I think that's really when the magic starts to happen.
Well, I think it is. I think what we should do today for our listeners is just kind of go through each one of those things, the business plan, the annual plan, why you should do them, why having a written plan is value added. And then we can talk about the ROI on those things for business owners that are not convinced.
Right.
And there definitely is an ROI, and it definitely is best practice. And there's a reason why those things are best practice, because they deliver on value. So let's kick off with the strategic plan and the principal benefits of that. And maybe you can chip in as well. But if you've got a strategic plan and you're thinking about how the business is going to operate for the next 3 to 5 years, and typically it's minimum 3, likely 5 years that you're going forward, which seems a long time to kind of predict into the future. But what you're really trying to do is identify a clear direction for the business. And that means that once you got that, everybody in the business, you can share it with them, but everybody in the business understands the mission, the vision, and the future goals of the business. And so it's important to get alignment from everybody. So that's value number one. A second value for a strategic plan is to really document the market positioning of the company, and to anticipate industry shifts and competitor moves and customer needs and so on over the longer term. So, you're starting to think about and justify on an ongoing basis the proactive market positioning through the planning process. You're also thinking about resource allocation and efficiency of resource allocation. This is a big one. Because, if you want to optimize value, you want to make sure that capital is allocated to the optimal uses. And it takes planning to be able to do that. You want to make sure that capital is provided on a timely basis. And it also wants to be on the highest impact opportunities. So planning enables you to proactively think about those things rather than just doing it on the fly.
Right.
One is risk mitigation. The business is going to face risks. Those risks change continually, and they go up and down. And so you want to identify threats early, not be slapped around the head with them, so to speak, when they happen. If you've anticipated them ahead of time, then you can proactively put a contingency plan in place and so on. Yeah. So that's valuable. It really is valuable because the costs of reactionary behavior get mitigated or eliminated. And then, obviously, if you've got a strategic plan and you've got stakeholders like investors or partners, and you can promote the strategic plan, what's that going to do for you? Well, it's going to give confidence to those investors and the strategic partners, and they will be much more supportive to the initiatives that you've got if you've laid out a clear plan and you're executing on the plan. And then finally, and this is a big one, Bob, and we talk about this with our clients all the time, is if you got a plan, it helps, as the CEO or a management team, it helps you make decisions easier. Decisions are easy to make because you've already thought about what the plan is. And, if the decisions that you're faced with are, is this in the plan or is this not in the plan? If it's in the plan, it's a dead easy decision, right. Provided nothing fundamentally is changed and so on. So decision making is much clearer. It is based on a clear set of agreed priorities, which are in the plan, instead of being totally ad hoc. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why doing long-range planning really facilitates making decisions and increasing value in the business.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And I can see that having a good strategic plan for all the reasons that you've said makes so much sense. But you think about it, take a marketing department. When someone's looking at creating a brand image, or somebody is looking at, maybe perhaps we're moving into a new marketplace or into a new segment. That just doesn't happen overnight, right? You've got to know exactly where you're going, and you've got to put those even tactical pieces in place that are in sync with this strategic plan, so that, kind of that analogy of all the oarsmen rowing in the same direction. You've got to make sure that everybody's rowing to that strategic plan. So that makes perfect sense. And interesting, the comment you made, when you talked about investors, investors are making decisions on the kinds of companies that they want to invest in. And they're definitely going to take a look at a strategic plan. And if they see value in that plan, they're going to definitely say, this is exactly the kind of company I'm looking for my mid to long-term investments. But if you don't have that, they may just pass you by just because they really don't know what you're all about. So it makes perfect sense.
Well, it's definitely a stepping stone to attracting good quality investors into your company.
Yeah.
So moving on to the second one that we talked about, which is the annual business planning process. And bear in mind we're trying to talk to our lower mid-market business owners who probably are skeptical of the planning process, don't really see the benefits. For heaven's sake, writing a plan down, that takes a lot of effort and so on. So let's talk about the annual. What are we trying to do with the annual planning process? Well, we're trying to translate the long-term strategy into actionable goals and budgets for the next 12 months. That's fundamentally what we're trying to do. And why do good quality companies do that? Well, it's kind of narrowing down that 5-year view into, a more realistic, more attainable 12-month view. And what we're going to do is focus the business on the measurable objectives for the next 12 months. So in other words, we want to put a budget around it. We want to make sure that the returns are coming from the investments that we've made. We want to identify key performance indicators of, from different parts of the business to basically measure whether what we're trying to achieve is being achieved as we go along. So it basically breaks down the large ambitions of the strategic plan into achievable steps with key performance indicators, measuring those steps. And it also, and this is an important word here, it also lays accountability out across the organization for delivering that performance. So the annual plan becomes much more realistic from the point of view of measurable outcomes and who is responsible for delivering those things.
Yeah.
The other thing about the business planning process is putting in budget discipline. And budget discipline basically ensures that the spending that you're making or the investments that you're making matches the priorities that have been set, and tries to identify the cash flows that come from those in order to give confidence to the owner or the investor that we're achieving our plans. Performance tracking is another big one for the annual budget. We want regular measurement of achievement, and we want to understand whether we're on target or off target, and so on. Team alignment, this is a big one. Having a business plan which is thoroughly understood by the team, and everybody's part in that plan has been discussed and agreed upon. What that does is it means that everybody knows what the priorities in the business plan are, and therefore it reduces conflict between the teams about whose priorities take precedent, because you've already agreed and discussed that and come up with a decision, or at least it mitigates those conflicts. And then finally, I think having a plan doesn't mean that you can't change things along the way. In other words, it allows for operational adaptability along the way. But it really does mean that, the team are focused on a structured framework of achieving a plan, number one. But if the plan is, for whatever reason, not possible because of stepping stones or hurdles that become evident during the year, then a good planning process allows for mid-year pivots. So in summary, the 12-month plan is much more definitive in terms of what is going to happen over a shorter period of time, but it should be flexible as well. So they would be the principal benefits of business planning. I would annual business planning.
Well, I can speak from experience, because as you know, I've spent much of my career on the sales side of the house. And when you take a look at a 5-year plan, very often those sales goals, those revenue numbers are very lofty. And they should be, right? A company should be, looking out into the future and saying, this is where we would like to be 5 years from now. Yet on January 1st, from a sales perspective, if I take a look at that 5-year goal compared to where we finished off the previous year, that can be a little bit intimidating. That can be a lot intimidating. And, I think that's where the annual planning process is so important, because then I can look at it and say, okay, we're going to break this down into bite-sized chunks. What do we have to do this year in order to stay in sync with our 5-year plan? And then, of course, you take that down even further. What do we have to do on a quarterly basis? What do we have to do on a monthly basis? So that, the goals and the objectives are not as intimidating, and you can put a plan around, together around that makes them absolutely achievable. And then, of course, as you say, the other critical thing, which I think a lot of companies sometimes don't pay enough attention to, is, that regular review, that regular KPI review to say, are we on target for the annual plan, for those monthly and quarterly goals? Because you want to make sure that you're staying, in line with achieving those goals. You don't want to wait until the 11th month and then say, my goodness, we're way off. You want to make sure that you are able to do those mid-course corrections on the operational side. And then, of course, as you say, if you get, into the second quarter, the third quarter, and things have fundamentally changed in the environment, or for whatever reason you're exceeding or you're not achieving those goals, you have the opportunity to pivot. Yeah. And that pivoting is so important, because you don't want to run full speed all the way to the stop sign at the end of the year and then have to hit the brakes. You want to be able to do it in a very cautious, conservative, and controlled way, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Well, when we first met, Bob, and when we put our first annual plan together for a client, I always remember back to the first question you asked me. When we start to think about sales growth in the context of the annual plan, and the first thing you always want to know out of me is, well, what's the plan goal? What does the plan say sales growth and sales revenue need to be, so that you can then run away with the sales team and the operational team and figure out how you're going to achieve those goals. So, like if that's not an indicator that you need a good plan, then I don't know what is really.
Well, and how many times have you and I been in a conversation with a client where the client is saying, I think I need to hire somebody, maybe a salesperson, maybe a marketing person, or they need to spend some money on software or something like that. And of course, you take I often see you coach them to say, let's look at the plan. Where are we against the plan? We're 6 months, we're 8 months into it. You're exactly where you can be, that you can pull the trigger. And by the way, we had planned for this. We knew that we needed to hire somebody when we got to a certain point. We're taking a look at the indicators here, and you, with all the comfort in the world, can go ahead and make that decision. Again, and that's something that, in the absence of that plan, those decisions for a small company to bring somebody on or to spend that money on software can be very difficult. But if you look at the plan and you say, we're right where we need to be, and now is the time to start that process, it makes it, it takes a lot of stress, away from the management team in making those key decisions.
Well, and here, in conclusion, here's the reason why those decisions are easy. If you've already done the calculations around whether, a piece of software or a new hire can be afforded before the year even starts, you've monitored whether you're on plan or off plan. If you're on plan, you already know if you can afford those things. And so the decision is, the question to ask is are those transactions that you're discussing, are they in the plan? Answer, yes, hopefully. And if they're in the plan, then you know whether they can be afforded or not if you're on plan. So,
right.
Good. So Bob, let's just move here's a big one. Why are written plans so valuable? I think we should explore that. The actual putting of pen to paper, so to speak, in old world parlance. Why is a written plan so valuable? Well, a plan isn't just something that you put together and you put it on the top shelf, only to be referred to, if ever, later on in the year. No, that's a plan. A written plan. It should be something that you work with day in, day out, and it's more than a memory aid. I mean, it really changes how the business runs effectively because of that continuous use, right? But a written plan, number one, creates clarity and shared understanding for everybody in the team, the management team, certainly. But hopefully you've had a town hall with the whole company and you've shared where the business is going, what the business directions are. So it totally avoids assumptions on behalf of people in the business because they've all been laid out. The priorities have been laid out, and it also avoids mental drift during the year. I can't remember what the plan is. It's there. You can always refer to it. Number one. Number two. This is a big one. It supports accountability. People get delegated to for doing things in a plan, and the progress can be tracked. If it's in writing, the progress can be tracked against specific documented commitments that everybody's discussed and agreed to. Thirdly, it enables continuity if something happens health-wise to a business leader, or if someone leaves the company. It supports continuity going forward because it's documented. Anybody can read that, and pick it up from where it was left off. It facilitates communication with the inside team, but it also facilitates communications with boards of directors, with investors, with other stakeholders like customers and suppliers and so on. So it facilitates communication and helps all of those people understand where you're going, and it's easily replicated when it's in writing.
Right.
It improves execution because it's documented and everybody can remember what the steps were and what needed to be followed and so on. And it also acts, and here's where we were talking about earlier about easy decisions. It also acts as a decision filter because if it's in the plan and you can afford it, it's easy to make the decision. If it's not in the plan, then that needs to be subject to greater scrutiny and the impact that whatever the changes will make on the future and the achievement of the plan. So that's a decision filter. So for all of those reasons, putting together a written plan, which sounds time consuming, for all those reasons, it's totally value added.
Yeah. Well, you think about it as you're saying these things, I'm thinking about where else do we use written plans? And of course, very often a written plan, we refer to it as a roadmap, right? And in the days when we actually did have roadmaps, imagine if you were traveling from A to B and you did not have a map, you did not know where you were going, you weren't able to refer to something, you weren't able to see how far have I come and how far do I have to go. So that was one example. And then, of course, you start thinking, yes, all that would be on a GPS today. The other thing is, you think about in the aviation industry, when a plane is flying from one airport or one city to the next, they always file a flight plan. Why do they file a flight plan? For all the reasons that you've just mentioned, so that the pilot knows where they're going, so that the ground control knows when they're going to arrive, so that air traffic control can keep track of them and can communicate. I mean, it's a critical aspect of flying, which we all want to be very safe and very predictable. And same thing in a company. You've got to have that flight plan, that you're tracking and following along to make sure that you're making all the right decisions as you go along.
Well, and the words that you've just used, when I think about value, business value for the company, we talk about cash flows, future cash flows into the future.
Mm-hmm.
Those cash flows in a highly valuable company need to be sustainable and predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the features you talked about as using your analogy of a flight plan, in business it's the same. If you want to fly to a city, then hopefully you fly direct and not all around the world or the wrong way or whatever. Mm-hmm. And if you have that level of predictability and efficiency, then people are going to want to travel with you, and that's the same with investors.
Right.
So here's a question just to conclude, Bob. For those business owners out there that are still not convinced about the value of business planning, what is the ROI? What are the persuasive things that for any entrepreneur, they might want to think about as a return on investment for doing business planning? Well, to me, the first one is, a return on investment without a plan will likely be accidental or not engineered. So in other words, if you do a plan, it's very engineered, it's very tailored, and if you execute to the plan, then a return on investment is going to be a lot more likely than if you don't do one.
Right.
It's a bit like getting on the most efficient plane, right? If you've got your plan and you know what the route is, and make sure you've got enough fuel and you've got the approvals to go across the airspace, then you're likely to get to the destination in a very planned way.
Mm-hmm.
The second point for those entrepreneur skeptics, is, if you don't have a plan, then the results that you achieve on average over the medium term, year over year, on average are likely to be much more volatile in terms of the results that you achieve. Volatility in the business world means more risk. More risk means lower value. Mm-hmm. Lower discounted the value of the cash flows. So higher volatility is likely to occur if you haven't done a plan.
Right.
Because you're going to be subject to the winds of economic cycles. You're going to be subject to the stomach wrenching effects of major customer churn. You're going to be surprised by competition that you haven't planned for. Mm-hmm. And really, there's no proactive buffer to any of those things. So planning is absolutely going to yield you a lower risk result, which means higher business value.
Right.
It's also going to mean likely opportunities missed because you haven't taken the time to think about opportunities and planning how you're going to take on those opportunities during the year. So without scanning the horizon, without prioritizing systematically the types of opportunities that you really want to take on versus the ones that just happen to arrive at any particular point in time, without doing that assessment ahead of time, those growth avenues that you really want to take on are going to be a lot more truncated and possibly pursued too late because you don't make efficient decisions.
Yeah.
Capital is going to be inefficiently allocated because you're probably going to be allocating it to the first opportunity that comes along rather than the best opportunity. And then finally, resilience to shocks that occur during the year is probably going to be lower because you haven't anticipated or you haven't got a margin of safety built into your business plan. So there's going to be weaker resilience to unexpected changes like supply chain or regulations or technological disruptions, and so there's going to be a weaker resilience to those things because it's going to take you longer to react, or it's going to be more costly to react. So overall, over time, I would say that not planning for the future tends to yield lower growth rates, higher stress, and more wasted effort trying to recover where you might have got to if you'd have thought about things in a rational way ahead of time.
Yeah. Well, just the way you've explained it and summed it up, if somebody was looking at investing in a company or acquiring a company, if they can take a look and see that company has had a very, judicious planning process over the last 5 years, and they can compare the plan to the results, and they can see what kind of input, the whole management team, had and how they managed those ups and downs, that gives you as an investor a lot of confidence that this is a quality company. Because everybody understands, the roadmap and how they should be following that roadmap. And it makes complete sense to me as to why I would want to invest in a company like that, which of course is another way of saying I would be willing to pay a higher value for that particular company because they have demonstrated that they've got a planning process that works. And again, it doesn't mean that the results have to be exactly what was, projected, 12, 14 months in advance. But what it does mean is that they followed the plan. They took advantage of those unexpected opportunities. They were also able to weather those unexpected twists and turns. And at the end of the day, they were always under control. And to me, that is so important in assessing value of a company is, were they under control for the whole year? Did they achieve their objectives? Was everybody involved? And I can see, it's easy to see why those kind of companies drive higher value than those who are not.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right, Bob. Investors are looking for planned growth, not accidental growth. Mm-hmm. They're looking for predictable growth, not variable up and down growth. They're looking for a risk profile that has been thought about, and they're not vulnerable to shocks or competitive threats and so on. They're looking for companies that are able to take on opportunities when they arrive, and maybe they've thought about those opportunities and laid them out ahead of time. And they're looking for capital efficiency. They're looking for decision-making quality to be timely and on the right thing. So all of those things put together, the expectations of sophisticated investors is, if you can deliver those things, if you can demonstrate that you're thinking about those things, there's going to be a higher level of interest in investing in your company. Mm-hmm. And that interest is probably going to be prepared to pay higher values on the basis that sustainability, predictability is high up on the scorecard in your particular company. So we at Rizolve would highly recommend structured planning processes in the way that we talked about at the beginning, which is on a cyclical, recurring basis, and strongly recommend that to all of our listeners.
Yeah. Well, and that's on that note, this is probably a great way to wrap things up. And I would recommend to our listeners that if you're interested in looking for more information and some background, on the concepts that we've been talking about, visit our website at www.rizolve.ca. Rizolve spelled RIZOLVE.ca. Lots of great information there, lots of downloads that they can take and then follow. Otherwise, reach out to you, Steve, or me, or anyone on our team, and we can certainly give you some more information. So, want to thank you, Steve, for a great conversation as always, and to all of our viewers, thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again on our next podcast.